Good afternoon, everyone, friends and students of Soil, Soul, and Spirit. Thank you so much for joining us for the second session of our traditional medicine series. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 elements and the 4 temperaments and how those relate and how they can be used in healing modalities. Looks like we have most everyone here, so I am going to turn it over to Dennis now. And we are there. Take it away, Dad.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for watching. And I'd like to thank the Koros board and especially the donors to KorosInstitute.org for supporting this work. We have a lot of other ideas we'd like to work on, and thank you for attending tonight, and thank you for your generosity. And thank you, Ben, because this gives me a sense that even as an old white-haired guy, I can still contribute something to the way the world is going. I love it, Ben. Thank you. So I'd like to return a little bit to last week with the idea of placebo. I just covered that a little bit. Placebo is a force in the soul that allows a remedy to be more effective. And it really is based on the idea of trust. So the patient has to trust in the remedy. It has to trust, the patient trusts in the diagnosis, and the patient has to trust then in the practitioner. When those 3 come together, whatever the remedy is becomes very effective. And without that effectiveness, no matter whether it's a substance or a ritual or whatever, the patient doesn't feel supported, and they are in a way in a strange human place, we could say. So in order to kind of back that up, I'd like to explain to you a little bit about a shamanic practice. So in a shamanic practice in indigenous cultures, the substance side of a remedy was carried by maybe a clan of herbalists or something. And they would know how to go out in the woods and collect herbs for healing. But the herbs and animal remedies were mostly for the chronic problems that went on and on and on, rheumatism and arthritis and things like that, and muscle aches. But the acute problems for a person that today we have technology for, the indigenous peoples in the shamanic cultures used symbol and ritual in the place of today what we do with technology. Well, I had an MRI for something a while back, and I can assure you that was pretty much a ritual that you will not forget if you're in one of those little sausages getting banged around by the sound. So the shamanic peoples understood that they needed to create out of the community that they were living in a kind of sympathetic wave. And the wave was brought by the practitioner, by the shaman. And the purpose of the shaman was to invite the community to reorient the soul that was ill with maybe cancer or something like that, to reorient that soul into 2 different communities. The community here on earth and the community of departed souls and gods and goddesses and angels that lived in the spiritual world. So the view of these cultures was that a person who was really acutely ill had lost a kind of standing in the community that required the shaman to do what they called soul retrieval. They understood that a seriously ill person was feeling estranged and uncertain in their soul life. Now, the thing that held the glue of the community together was we could say, shared symbols of the spiritual world. And the forms in the spiritual world were seen as templates of life on earth. And when a person got sick or ill, the greatest cause for illness was a kind of uncertainty about life in general. Can I trust life? Can I bring life into a context where it has meaning again? And when that happened, the community on earth embraced the estranged soul, because the shaman was able to go into the spiritual world on behalf of the community on earth. That took a toll on the shaman, because they needed to navigate into areas where sometimes uncertainty ruled the roost, like spiritual ideas or beings who live in the spirit are creating all kinds of problems. Last week or last time, I read you that quote from Steiner about demons. Uncertainty creates demons that estrange people from their life. And when they get estranged from their life, they start to get very anxious and they lose faith in life. So the purpose of a shaman was to go into the spiritual world, and the way they protected themselves was by using symbols that the community here on this side of the threshold held to be sacred in common. The commonality of the belief in the symbol of the community on earth as an image of the community of souls, of ancestors and gods in the spiritual world, that link was the healing. So the symbol requires that the shaman have the proper diagnosis, the proper remedy, which in shamanism was a very rigorous training to be able to stand, being able to chant for 3 days solid, day and night, without stopping, and remembering the chants and the particular songs that had to happen. And when the community was invited in to participate in that, the community understood that the symbols that were being used by the shaman were pictures of the divine world, of the spiritual world, and the sympathy that was evoked in the community by the shaman being able to do that using symbols that they held in common brought into the focus of the healing ritual tremendous forces of will and sympathy and warmth. That's what a symbol was to the ancient people. It wasn't something that's slapped on your car. It wasn't something that's on your t-shirt or on your shoes. We call that a symbol. Oh, it's the Nike swoosh or something. No, it was a deep belief, a deep, commonly held belief that the spiritual world was real, and that the symbols that were in this world that the shaman would bring back from that world were clear and honest pictures of how that world worked, so that the person who was ill could feel the community resonating with them, and the goodwill from the relatives who provided for the rich. They would make food and things like that. That goodwill was a healing to integrate the lost soul back into the relationship between the spiritual community and the community of people here. And that included the community of what Rudolf Steiner used to call the so-called dead, the ancestors. So that's like a little capsule of what we could say is shamanism. So the shared symbols of a spiritual world allowed the shaman to focus on soul integration. They called it soul retrieval. They had to go into a special level of consciousness in order to retrieve the soul that had lost faith or trust in life. When they lose trust in life, they start to have great anxiety. Today, that's, young people mutilating themselves and things like that. They've lost trust in life. They can't stand any more uncertainty. So they have to do extreme things in order to get sympathy. And the community back in the day would be called to bring that sympathy. Sympathy was the tool of the shaman, but they couldn't bring it themselves. They had to bring it from the community at large that had a very firm belief that the symbols and the things that the shaman was bringing back from the spiritual world were clear and uncertain pictures of a better life. So here's a diagram that's useful. We have a soul in the middle. The soul is like a fulcrum between the symbol. That is, the symbol is a kind of token that allows you to have access to the consciousness of the beings in the spiritual world. And that symbol unites the individual and the community. And today, all the stuff that's going on with all this crazy stuff in the world about health is shattering the unity that is needed in order to heal, in order to have placebo be effective. So we have all kinds of beliefs and structures and very firmly held beliefs in one thing or another. And I've heard stories about the anti-vax people showing up at an anti-vax meeting with Trump people who they probably would not want to have dinner with, and going, what's going on here? This is a picture of a disconnect between a spiritual reality behind illness and how the community is experiencing it. And stay tuned, it's not over. So I'd like to explain to you how the shamanic consciousness is an image of something that's far deeper than just the tribe you belong to. And today everything is tribal. I believe in this, I don't believe in that. I'm a Republican, I'm an anarchist, I'm a whatever. That's just tribal consciousness. And it creates more division than it's worth. So how that worked out in the minds of the people who worked with a shamanic practice is a very interesting thing to look at. So here is, I'd like to give you a picture of how what is known as the wounded healer went about going into the spiritual world to draw forces from the spiritual world to heal. So I'd like to compare the shamanic practice of the Navajo healer and a First Nation healer. The Navajo healer worked with a malaise, a problem that was very widespread in the Navajo peoples. And that malaise was manic hysteria. Women could have hysterical events that would create all kinds of difficulties for the people around them. And then a healer would have to be called in to have a ceremony to sing a particular song for the type of demon and dark force that was inhabiting the woman that was having, or man that was having a manic events that they couldn't control. Now that manic quality was an image of the environment that the Navajo people lived in. I've done a lot in shamanic practice for many, many years and read a lot of, the book of the Hopi and God knows what about shamanic practice because it has to do with the symbolic consciousness. So manic qualities of the Malays of the Navajo healer, that was primarily what they had to deal with. They had all kinds of songs that they had to memorize and chants that they had to do for days and days and days while the community was gathered around the sick person. And they made a mandala of sand in the center of the ritual place and laid the victim on that mandala and then proceeded to do the chants to try to bring the ill person, retrieve their soul from the manic space of the demons. They lived in an environment of hot and dry. They lived in the Southwest desert down here. That was their terrain. And the approach that the Navajo healer used was to impress the people who were gathered that the training of the Navajo healer was to go through this incredible memory of chanting and power in order to let the people know that they were quite aware of cultural taboo. So if they made a mistake, the whole ceremony was bust. If they used the wrong word, then that let the demon in instead of getting it out. And so the culture of the Southwest desert with this hot and dry consciousness created a very strict, very highly, we could say, cognitive consciousness on the part of the healer that there could be no mistakes because there were so many things that could go wrong. There was, you live in the desert, you turn up a rock and suddenly the scorpion is under the rock and, or whatever, or you go to sleep and you lay down, you put your feet in your sleeping bag and suddenly you're lunch for a rattlesnake or something. So there was a great deal in the environment that was very hostile. So the native healer in the Navajo shamanic tradition had to undergo a tradition where they could have very clear pictures of what was taboo and what was allowed. The taboo and the rigor of the healer in dealing with taboo inspired the community that they knew what they were doing and there was no mistake, and that they could bring together a lot of forces of certainty that they could trust the healer, they could trust the ceremony, they could trust the remedy, they could have placebo, and the patient received the rigor and trust and warmth of will of the community that was brought into focus by the healer. And we could say that the Southwest desert, with all of its dangers of immediate things, you better pay attention here because if you make a wrong move, you're lunch meat, that created the ritual symbolic condition for the healing. It was a terrain, environmental, passed on from one healer to another. The songs were passed on by families of healers and very often the healer was called to be a healer by some type of disaster that they had to go through personally, some type of illness or even a mental imbalance themselves in order to be wounded in order to be called to be a healer. Why did they have to be wounded to be a healer? So that they could have compassion for somebody who was ill. It was all based on compassion and sympathy and certainty. So that's the desert Southwest, the Navajo tradition of taboo as a basis for a very rigorous training in cognitive experience. You don't want to be off with the fairies here because that's not going to do the healing. Now, I'd like to contrast that with the shamanic traditions of the First Nation peoples in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, and up in Canada. Those people, those healers had to do with soul retrieval of a soul that was deeply depressed, not manic. They were depressed. Their environment was cold and wet. Their environment was a northern boreal forest of mosses and fog and rain and the cold, and people who lost their feeling for life just kind of went off into the fog of their own depression. So the healer in the First Nation healing, the shaman, the training was not to make more taboo or to guard against taboo. The shaman had to go in the opposite direction from depression, which was ecstasy. They had to learn how to exit their physical body through rituals that caused them to lift out of their consciousness and travel through soul world. So when they did that, in ecstasy, they were going into the equivalent of the boreal forest where the sick person had to be retrieved because they lost their enthusiasm for life, because every day in Skagit world is cold, wet, moss, one day after another, after another, after another. After a while, you just want to wander off into the woods and not participate anymore. So the shamanic practitioner in the Pacific Northwest had to learn to go into the woods where the soul was lost, and to deal with the beings in the woods where the soul was lost. They had their own chants and things, but the endurance contest that they had to deal with was getting outside their body and warding off the beings on the other side of the threshold that wanted to occupy their body while they were doing strange things here. They were talking in tongues. They were talking with their allies and animals. They were doing saying strange things that didn't make much sense to people. Their eyes were rolling around in their heads. Spirits were coming into the room and speaking through them and things like that. So that ecstasy that they would go through, they would have a drum, they called the drum the horse. The drumming would put them into a consciousness where they would have to exit their day consciousness. That was a total taboo to a Navajo healer. Exit your day consciousness, don't do that. They would have to learn how to navigate in exiting the day consciousness and still holding a thread of a contact with a healing ritual that would allow them to access the community, and the community would gather and say, wow, he's really out there, or she's really out there. I can tell that. And that would allow the community to have the faith that the healer was doing the work that needed to happen, because they could go into that world and simultaneously answer questions in this world. If you think about that, they were in a highly altered state, and yet if you asked them a question, they would turn to you and answer you from themselves. We traveled in Japan, and we were part of a tour that was going up through a mountain area where the shamanic practice was to have a person who went into altered consciousness and a person who stayed in day waking consciousness. The altered consciousness person was called an oracle, and they would lose their own consciousness and start speaking in strange ways. And then they had to travel with somebody called an agent. And an agent and an oracle. The oracle would go into altered shamanic consciousness, and the ancient would stay in day waking consciousness and use mudra and hand movements and certain words that they would say while the oracle was in trance consciousness, where they would say to the people listening, don't listen to this, it's just his stuff. Oh, here we go. This is the God actually speaking. So there's another version of a shamanic practice to do a soul retrieval of a sick person. They had the Japanese shamanic practice was to recognize that these two states somehow have to be connected. So that's shamanism. And we say, well, okay, do we have anything like that? So I would like to point your attention to something we call baptism. And I was raised in a Catholic family. I was an altar boy and whatever. And I used to be the guy who would serve baptism. And they would have the little baby there that pour water, the priest would pour water on the baby's head. But then they would take their finger and dip it in salt and put it on the baby's tongue. And a little bit of oil, and they would anoint their forehead with a little bit of oil. And I used to look at that and go, what is that about? The baby would like, from the salt. But now as an alchemist, those three things, water, salt, and oil, water is an image of the mercury process of the circulatory system. Oil is an alchemical image of the warmth of the sulfur or digestive process. And a salt is a picture of the nervous system and the thinking process. So we could say, if you look on websites about what baptism is about, it's to integrate the new soul into the community. It's exactly the same thing. It's a practice of healing this young soul who is vulnerable to negative influences from where they just came. They're still connected to that spiritual world, and they need to be made into a soul that has a link between that world and this world, where the community of souls here can support them. So they get baptized so that they remember who they are, so that they can be a soul in a community. Full immersion baptism is when you get pushed underwater to the point where you start freaking out and you leave. Part of you leaves, and then when you come out, they say, okay, you did a good job. That's a shamanic practice. So we have these things, but we don't call them that, because they become codified and say, yeah, you have to get baptized, you have to do this as part of your religion, we say. But it's a very ancient part of the religion, having to do with trust that the healer knows what they're doing, the priest knows what they're doing. This is a remedy. The remedy is a diagnosis that's correct, and the practitioner has been trained to do what they do. So yeah, let's do this. We could say that's the essence of healing. So if you look on some baptismal fonts, you see little mandalas. If you look at what the shamans in the Pacific Northwest had, they had talismans and amulets and things, or mandalas. If you go to the Navajo ceremony, you look at it, they made a sand painting like they do in Tibet, and they laid the sick person on the mandala. The mandala is a universal symbol of how wholeness maintains itself through situations of constant change. It's a certainty developing symbol. I've worked with the mandala for a long time now. And I can tell you, it is a symbol that has universal application. I have used mandalas so many times in so many ways to try to understand substances and soul work and weather and, oh my God, the mandala of earth, water, air, and fire, the elemental world. So here's a mandala of the elemental world: earth, water, air, and fire. Those are the 4 elements. And if I take the 4 elements and I work with them, I see earth has a kind of gravity force. It's a gravity force. And air has a levity force. And earth and air are opposites. The gravity force everything goes down and settles out. The levity force is everything goes up and becomes more rarefied. And so actually in the mandala, the 4 elements, it's split where earth and water have an affinity to gravity and air and fire have an affinity to levity. So levity, air and fire are the most fundamental polarity in alchemy to gravity, earth and water. So in the system of 4 elements, earth and water are gravity forces, and air and fire are levity forces. Earth is almost total gravity, and air is almost total levity, but water and fire as polarities share this gravity levity state. So water can be gravity, then it's ice. Water can be levity, then it's vapor. Air can be levity, or fire can be levity. When it connects to air, it gets very inflamed, but then fire connects to earth by burning things out completely and creating ash that falls into gravity. So those are the 2 poles, levity and gravity, earth and water gravity, air and fire levity. But we see fire and air is inflammatory, but fire and earth creates something else because the fire goes up and the earth drops down. What does that mean? So the ancient peoples understood that earth, water, air, and fire, the 4 elements, were not the only way to look at those. They understood that earth has a relationship to water by what they share is what they call the temperament of cold. Earth is tempered by water. Water is tempered by earth, and the tempering that they do is cold. Water gets tempered by cold until it becomes ice and earth gets tempered by water until it becomes water and mud, and then the water goes. So tempering means that the 4 elements, earth, water, air, and fire, are tempered into each other. They are balanced into each other, and they oscillate. Earth and water unite in cold. Water and air unite in moistness. Air and fire unite in heat production, and fire and earth unite in drying out. Those are the 4 temperaments, and we're going to look at them in detail in a moment. So the native peoples understood this because not only the shamanic practice of healing somebody, but they used a mandala to say, it's not only substances and rituals, that the soul itself has a kind of cosmic quality in it. And they understood that the movement from earth to water, from water to air, air to fire, had implications for the soul life of a person, for the balance of a person. And they called it the medicine wheel. So there was medicine when you would go from the position of the east to the position of the south. In the east, they would say, that's the position of having to see far, meaning I have to plan, I have to think about things in the future. But when I think about things in the future, I can get so squirrely that my belief becomes so fixed that nobody can talk me out of it. I just become this fixed belief person because I say, I have a vision and this is what's going to happen. Well, okay, but you know, you have to move your wheel here, folks. You have to move the medicine wheel, and you move the medicine wheel from see far by having trust in life, that even though I see that I think this is where we need to go, maybe life has a different requirement from me. And so they say trust in life was the place of the south. Place of the east, the rising sun was seeing far. Thank you for sharing what you see far, but now we have to somehow integrate that into life. We have to temper the vision into the actual life. So I have to trust that life is going to allow what I see to change. And if I'm born in trust in life, suppose I'm born on the medicine wheel in the place of the south, then I trust everything is life. What I think is going to happen, whatever is going to happen, that's trust in life, that jumping mouse, you know, in the tradition. I have to somehow, out of my trust in life, I have to go inside myself and say, what happens to me when I trust in life and then it doesn't work out so well? I have to look in. I can't just go along and say, oh, it's all going to be fine. Well, maybe not. And maybe because there's a thing called karma. So I have to look in. If I'm a big trust in life person, I have to look in and say, what is my motive for this? And when I look in, that's the place of the West. And it's kind of sobering. So some people who are born in the place of the West, they're very sobering. We would call them melancholic. They just are always looking inside all the time, and that's all there is. The rest of the world is not really what needs to happen. So the place of looks in is the place of the West. They would say that's where the dead live. That's where the ancestors live, in the place where the sun goes away, where it goes into the darkness. And when the sun goes away, if I'm a looks in person, I have to learn how to give away my I'm sure this is what's happening inside me. This is the world according to Dennis. I have to go to the place of the north of death, of what I believe, in order to give away. And that's the place of the north. So the place of the north, when I do giveaway, I'm freed up from my opinions that I gathered in the West and in the South. And I have a new place of the East where I can now see far, but it's been corrected by one circuit of the medicine wheel. So that's the whole of the way of looking at earth, water, air, and fire as elements, but it requires that I have a tempering between the place of the East, the place of the South, the place of the West. I have to temper by moving my medicine wheel. It's called tempering. And that's a temperament because I can't really get far if I just stay stuck in one place. If I stay stuck in one place, that's called illness. I become estranged from the whole. And when I become estranged from the whole, I get fixed opinions. I get fixed in my ideas. I become very anxious. I start exhibiting things that cause me to want to not participate in life anymore until I can control everything. And this is like the great malaise today. Guess what? We're not in control of everything. We have to do giveaway. And we're approaching giveaway right now. That's called pandemic, the place of death. Hopefully that made sense. because it's great wisdom from the native peoples from the past. The medicine wheel was all over. People understood the 4 directions. Now, as healers today, in a contemporary consciousness, these qualities of earth, water, air, and fire, and the tempering of cold, moist, hot, and dry have been used by healers since the Roman times. There was a Roman physician, I believe it was a physician known as Celsus, who developed what today is known as the infection curve. It's an infection cycle. What happens when you get infected? So when you get infected, Celsus and Galen after him, later Romans, said there are 4 stages: rubor, calor, dolor, tumor. That's an old mantra. Rubor, calor, dolor, tumor. Rubor means red. That's what it means in Latin. Calor means hot. Dolor means pain. And tumor means swelling. So when you get an infection, what the old people said is these are the 4 stages of knowing that you have something going on in your body, where your body is responding to something that it's not happy about. The first thing is that you see, suppose you get poked with a nail or a thorn or something. First thing you see is the kind of redness that arises. That redness means that there is blood moving to go into the area where there is a challenge. And we could say that that blood moving and flowing is really the temperament of moisture. Moisture wants things to flow. That's what it does. It says, oh, you're stuck here, have some water, and you turn into mud. You can flow. Oh, you're salt? Yeah, here, have some water. Now you're a solution. Now you can flow. So blood moving towards the site of an injury, or we could even say now, here's where it gets a little funny. We could say that rubor stage of the moisture it's not only a body infection. It could also be a soul infection. It could also be that something happens to me and I suddenly feel my blood rushing to the surface. And that's the beginning of a process that I'm going through of correcting something in my soul. We call it shame. So, or I get irritated and very angry, and suddenly my face gets red and my blood rushes to my face and my temple. That's blood movement saying there's more to happen here. Stay tuned. So the stage of rubor is the beginning of a body process that has to go through its process no matter what. So rubor, the moist temperament, leads to calor, the hot temperament. And in the hot temperament, calor, what is happening in infection is there is a local, a very local kind of battleground being developed by my immune system. My immune system is being called by the hormones and stuff that are created by the blood coming into this area. The blood just flows in there and says, this is what this thing looks like. The immune system that's in the lymph says, oh, okay, got it. Send in a macrophage and identify this thing and then duplicate it, and then we'll kill everything that's like that. So the immune system comes in, and the metabolic action that entails, all the cells that are kind of metabolizing all this pathogen, that creates heat, but it's a very local heat. So that's calor, that's getting very warm, but it's a very local warming around an infection. But if it's an infection in your soul, it might not be so local. It might be that infection is a long-term thing. It's a chronic thing. And then we call it autoimmune disease. It's just an infection everywhere. It's a heat inflammatory response. So that's calor. And then what happens out of calor is dolor. Dolor means pain in Latin. And when the immune system goes in, the first responders, second responders, whatever, they just start destroying the pathogen or whatever's coming in. There's a very deep metabolic response, and that creates a tremendous amount of debris as the pathogen's being disassembled, and parts of it are sort of that way. And then the first responders are dying, and it's actually is a kind of a battleground there. And a lot of debris is put into the area. That debris, we call it pus and things like that. And that is carrying all the toxins that were exchanged between the host and the pathogen. And that begins to start irritating the nerves in that area. So that nerve irritation is dolor, is pain. And then we go, oh, wow, there's really something going on in here. And then what happens is all that debris, if we don't do something with it, it gets stuck in there. And then that becomes then the basis for chronic issues that I talked about last time. Unless I actually have a good immune system that can, one, go send first responders in and destroy things, but then the immune system also has to say, well, we need the mop-up crew to come in and to dissolve and cleanse and repair the tissue. And when that lymph starts flooding that area to dissolve all of those toxins, that's the swelling of the tumor. So we have tumor is moist, hot, dry, cold. The dryness of the dolor is that the immune system is making all of the pathogens into little bits. And alchemists would say the pathogen is becoming dust. It's becoming debris. It's drying out the blood and creating conditions of a dryness. So these qualities are also qualities of temperaments, of phlegma, and a choleric temperament, and a melancholic temperament, a dry temperament, and a sanguine temperament. So in next time we meet, what I'm going to do is try to connect these kinds of ideas here to things like what plants really work on protein digestion, what plants really help with carbohydrate digestion, what plants really help with oil digestion, etc. What plants help lift salts that are part of an inflammatory process on the periphery. What plants will help an inflammatory process that's in the bones. What plants help congestion that's a kind of deposition of a cold process in the liver. When does it happen? What plants help congestion in the lungs? So I'm going to make a little circle here. So these mandalas are images that have been used by healers for generations to try to make an assessment, not just of the diagnosis of the physical properties of a disease process, or even the life processes of a disease process, but the soul aspects of a disease process. And today, as I tried to give some pretty strong pictures last time about allopathic medicine, The allopathic medicine is excellent for acute conditions, but I can tell you as an old person with old persons who are friends, some of them are just actually hoping for an acute condition to take them out of the game because their chronic ailments are day after day after day after day of aches and pains and disability. I have some dear friends who, well, I won't even go into it, but they are being held together with duct tape and goodwill by medical science today. And they just really just want to pull the plug, but they can't do it because it's a moral thing. And yet so they suffer. So the old practitioners, the old shamans would say, as in line with Rudolf Steiner, the illness is not in the body, it's in the soul. It's in the belief structures in the soul that get challenged by deep uncertainty. And the more uncertainty that the soul gets locked into, the more anxiety that's created. And the chemistry that's created out of the anxiety produces hormones and enzymes and whatever that then go into autoimmune responses. Rudolf Steiner's quote with all of this is inflammation is not a problem. It's a healing. It's only a problem when it becomes chronic. When inflammation becomes chronic, that's degenerative disease. When the opposite, when fixed nature becomes chronic, when the cold processes dominate, then tumor develops. And today we say it's a tumor. A tumor is a result of a soul losing a kind of, I guess I could say, they lose contact with the possibility that there is levity in life. And a person who has degenerative diseases has lost contact with, you got to pay the piper to dance. So many people I know that are caught in degenerative diseases, when they were younger, we would be sitting and they'd say, I can eat anything I want. And well, yeah, you can, but maybe you shouldn't. So that is like, yeah, I can do whatever I want. Well, that's a levity force of I'm in air phase, I'm the boss of me, and you're not the boss of me. And so I'm just going to do whatever I want and eat whatever I want. And now they have to go into, because of the mandala, they have to go and visit chronic inflammation that creates deposits. So the chronic inflammation is up here in the hot pole, and it creates deposits in the cold pole. Yeah. So where I want to go next time is I want to take a look at very simple things that you can do for yourself in your kitchen, that if you have acute disease, you need to see somebody so they can put in a stent or something. I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about the possibility of learning something in your life from having to go have a stent put in. That's a soul issue. It's not a body issue. And the learning was what the shamans were trying to do for the patient by saying, Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Patient, you need to connect to the spiritual community, and go into the spiritual community to bring back from the spiritual community the things that the community here need to hear. The community here needs to hear what you are learning from the spirits. When do you learn that? When you go to sleep. So the taking of images from plants, especially, my forte has been to study plants. I also have studied minerals, not so much animal remedies. But what I want to share with you in 2 weeks are some simple things you can do for yourself in your kitchen if you have chronic issues using this mandala here of rubor, calor, dolor, tumor, using those temperamental qualities to assess yourself. What is it that's going on with my liver? Because even now we have hyper and hypo. We have too much, not enough. Well, what does that say? It's not one thing. It's the dynamic. And the dynamic is the thing that Rudolf Steiner said we need to have in the realm of bios, and that was called bios dynamicos, or we call it biodynamics. So that is the temperamental movements in the 4 seasons of the dry season, the cold season, the moist season, the wet season. Should you eat certain things in the wet season that are okay, and in the dry season, avoid them? Should you have certain practices that you do in hot season that would be very bad for you in the cold season? Those kinds of things are the basis of traditional medicine, Ayurveda and whatever, that use the temperamental mandala as a way of diagnosis, not only just diagnosing the physical ailment to find a germ theory silver bullet, but to say, how is this disease body responding to challenges in the soul? And I could say, after studying this stuff for 50 some years, the real key is uncertainty. If I'm in conditions of uncertainty, my body is designed to create enzymes and hormones that put me on hyper alert. That's why Rudolf Steiner said, when somebody tries to convince somebody else of something, they're creating demons. Well, that's in the old language. Today, a demon in psychology is called a syndrome, a pattern of stimulus and response that is triggered by a certain word or by a color or by an idea. Here's my idea. I think vaccines are great. Boom. Suddenly, we're in a strange world there of belief structures. And by the way, some people have said to me, okay, Dennis, you're out here talking about illness and stuff. What do you think about vaccines? You know, friends, I'm not qualified to talk about vaccines whatsoever. However, I have found the work of a young doctor, Dr. Zach Bush, Z-A-C-H, Bush, Dr. Zach Bush. Now, if you Google Dr. Zach Bush, the first couple things that come up in the queue are the deniers, because the deniers will swoop in like pathogens on a being that is beginning to make sense. That's because the great malaise today for quote unquote civilized people is uncertainty. And so let's go in and create uncertainty about this guy's ideas. Now, I will admit that Dr. Zach Bush has some ideas that you have to take with a grain of salt. unless you understand that there is a spiritual world that is trying to connect to the community of souls here. If you understand that, what Zach Bush is saying makes a heck of a lot of sense. If you don't understand that, and it's just a battle between the medical practitioners and the political system, then there's no way that we can understand it. Zach Bush has a very unusual take on what a virus is actually designed to do in the bigger picture in the cosmos. And from my studies of 50 some years of trying to understand physiology, his thoughts are worth contemplating. So if you're really interested or you really have a lot of stuff going on in your life, look at what he says and think because there are so issues that go into cosmic karmic issues around this, and the politicizing of those social issues is just a deep well of uncertainty. So the takeaway from all of that is, even when we are creating medicines, the challenge for today for contemporary people is uncertainty. So the shamanic approach is we have to go deeply into the realm of uncertainty and try to do soul retrieval in uncertainty. That's called research, actual research, and trying to come to grips with a sense that there is truth. But as the native people said, there is truth, but no human can speak it, because all they can do is say one thing at one time. That's why they always sat in a circle. And everybody has a chance to say their little thing. And there's no comments made when you say your little thing. You just have to do a giveaway and go into the place of the north in order to have a new enlightenment, so you can see far in the place of the east and learn how to trust life in the place of the south. And you take all that and you take that into the place of the west looks within. And you go to sleep with some pictures from your research, and you wake up with a new insight. The native peoples were incredibly gifted psychologists, because their major healing in the soul was through symbols. That's my little message today. Maybe we could do a Q&A.
Thank you, Dad. The refinement there and the subtleties between the general dynamics of the elements, the moist, the hot, the cold, those give just another layer. So thank you so much for that. We've got some wonderful questions coming in here. Can you speak more to a condition like MS, which seems to exhibit all stages of the wheel at once? How does one break down the process of creating a healing approach?
Yeah, well, it does touch all, but it is a sclerosis. So the sclerosis part is down here in tumor. It's a congestion. It's a sclerotic condition. Inflammatory response and sclerosis are the two poles there. Sclerosis is cold and inflammation is hot. And the healing of multiple sclerosis, I have a dear friend who has cured herself of multiple sclerosis by engaging her will in studying nutrition in a fierce way, and went from having a diagnosis that she would never walk again to going up in the hills and using a chainsaw to fell oak trees. Miracle. But this woman has taken the right approach. She has found that she needs to educate herself about her own physiology. And Rudolf Steiner has said that if people studied physiology, they would understand my work. And physiology, especially in the first, I would say the first 3 months of life in the embryo, the physiology of the embryo is a gift from the hierarchies of how to heal, of when to heal, and how to get the temperamental qualities to move. So this young woman has used food as a medicine, but not so much just some program. She took it upon herself to actually study in detail how digestion operates. And for my money, that is the cure to many, many things. I told Ben I'm thinking about a couple months from now what that series will be. And tentatively now it's like the mystery of digestion, all the different aspects of digestion, because digestion is what it's all about. You can get the best food. You can go to Whole Foods and pay an arm and a leg to get the best food from whatever and make sure that it has never been touched by human hands or whatever, and take it and you're still sick. Because there's another side to it. And what this young woman did was use her will to say, I'm going to study this. And at the same time, I'm going to learn how to cook my food so that I keep life in it. And there's a whole mystery there. That's what I want to do in 2 weeks. I want to say your kitchen is your dispensary. It's your laboratory and your dispensary. And if you have a front or backyard, that is your pharmacy for degenerative problems. And multiple sclerosis is a degenerative, it's a failure of the immune system to be able to deal with sclerotic tendencies everywhere. It's just deposits. And the deposits could be of salts, they could be of fats and oils in the liver, they could be all kinds of things. There could be issues in the kidneys, but there are relationships of hyper and hypo that what causes multiple sclerosis in one person is not causing multiple sclerosis in another person. That's why it's difficult to say, here's your remedy. So this young woman went to many, many specialists, and they all told her, you can't heal yourself with food. And God bless her, she said, you know what? You're wrong. I can heal myself with food. And that belief caused her to study, and the study gave her a deep competence that what she was studying was getting rid of uncertainty. And when she got deeper into it, she found she had a capacity to do that. And now she's working to try to make videos on how to cook. I don't want to do a reveal here because I want to keep her in my heart. But God bless her. She healed herself of multiple sclerosis. And we could say by learning how to cook. My great passion is learning how to cook my mom said, I'm not raising a son who doesn't know how to cook. So right from the get-go, I was learning how to cook. I was in the Navy, I was a cook. I worked my way through college, I was a cook. I got married, I'm the breakfast cook. And my kids will tell you that I had severe allergies to you name it. And I healed myself through food, through cooking. So I would say find some practitioner who could give you a diagnosis of what organ is going on in multiple sclerosis, but then study it yourself so you get the competence to get rid of the uncertainty, and you can heal it with sauerkraut. One of my favorite healing things, sauerkraut.
Awesome. Yes, I can attest to the beauty and the deliciousness of his sauerkraut. There's a bunch of really wonderful questions that are asking if you could go into the soul gesture of the other calor, dolor, and tumor. You had spoken a little bit about rubor as the anger and the shame and that heat. Could you go into that a little with the other three?
Yeah. So calor is heat. Some people automatically go to heat as an answer for something. They just get angry. They get hot under the collar. They come, they're like one of those, and they say, my way or the highway, or this is the way it happens. And that's a choleric. And in the second, I think, or second week of embryology, the heart that starts outside the top of your head, outside the embryo, comes in through your mouth and comes down through your gut and pushes all the other organs out of the way. That's the choleric. That's the heat. Says, my way or the highway. Get out of the way because the big daddy's coming down the tubes here. That's the heart. That's the lion. That's the heat. That's calor. And if people who have excessive heat there, their fear, we could say, is that their heart, which is the organ that is connected to it, will get overheated and check out, turn into cold, fear of death. Dolor, pain, is a person who specializes in being very sensitive to things. Their skin is dry. You have to cut the labels out of their shirt because they get easily irritated. They're sitting in a room with somebody who has a kind of fragrance on, and they have to get up and go across the other side of the room and say, that fragrance is not cool. If somebody in the back row of an airplane has a quarter of a piece of a peanut, they go anaphylactic. That's a pain, a dryness of a sanguine. And then the tumor is cold. That is Eeyore. Oh me. Everything ends up just being stuck. Everything is just the way it is. That's the melancholic. They're very sensitive of their bones. The salt of everything that they ate becomes their bone. Tumor. That's the short and ugly, but next time we come together, we're going to do more of that.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. There seems to be a little confusion also about the role of uncertainty. It seems like you had said that uncertainty towards existence benefits the soul. Is that the case?
If you deal with it, yeah. There's a famous story about Jacques Cousteau. Is perfect for this. Jacques Cousteau was on the Calypso, which was traveling all over the world. And he was an old man, and the crew knew what to do. So he was down in the crew's mess, kind of drinking coffee or whatever, day after day after day after day. And his son was the captain, would go in on him and say, "You okay? Are you okay?" And it's like, "Yeah, we're just on a ship." And if you've ever been on a ship on a cruise, you just know it's like day after day after day, until someone would come in and say, "Oh my God, the rudder just fouled, and we have to take care of it." And immediately Jacques Cousteau would jump up, leave the cruise mess, and look 30 years younger. Why? Because there was uncertainty. He thrived on uncertainty. He was a kind of choleric guy. Let's get this done. Let's do something. Let's make this happen. So in that context, yeah, if I'm melancholic and I get uncertain, I go inside myself, and in my melancholy, I have to say, maybe I need to go and study this a little more. I need to crack the books and get to the bottom of this because I'm uncertain. It makes me feel anxious. If I'm a sanguine and I'm uncertain, there's a famous phrase. It's called run away and do something else. And when I run away and do something else, if I'm not allowed to run away and do something else, I turn in on myself and I get very anxious and I start doing crazy things because I'm not allowed to run away. I'm not allowed to change and do something else. I'm forced to comply. Ooh, sanguines just will resort to very strange things when they're forced to comply. And if I'm in the moist pole, I'm a phlegmatic and I start feeling uncertain. So I go and get a quart of Ben and Jerry's. That solves things. I'm uncertain. I know Ben and Jerry's is going to make me feel better. So that's where I go. Well, like I said, we'll do more of this next time.
Excellent. All right. So there's one that's a little more broad here to, I think, wrap it up. And it's asked by Maud, and she says, once the community is disconnected, like so much of our society is now, how do we find symbols that can be understood by the collective community?
By the
collective community.
Yeah, that is the big question because unfortunately we're in consciousness all, and the idea of a collective community is very distasteful to a lot of people. That's why we have, partisan infighting on everything under the sun. So the idea of a collective community, that we can do something to change the collective community, is kind of an old idea. So in the I Ching, they say, if you want to change something, get yourself in order, get your family in order, and get your state in order, but in that order. Don't try to get your state in order if your own self is not in order or your family's not in order. Don't start to speak for a bunch of other people unless you've actually done the research and gone into the space where you understand what it is. And I mean, I remember seeing a video of some congressman in Congress with a snowball saying, "Hey, here's a snowball. Ha ha, what's this have to do with global warming?" Well, hello. That was not a really learned response there. That was like they go, it's a snowball, guy. And climate change requires that we understand very large pictures, which means we have to study very large pictures until we lose our uncertainty. If I don't have the capacity, and here I could put in a little something of the cell phone generation. When you're used to trying to find certainty by tapping on a cell phone, you're in deep water because all you're doing is getting answers that somebody else may or may not have actually thoroughly researched and is just putting forth an opinion that you're tapping into, and you try to fit that into your worldview, and maybe you can and maybe you can't. So you tear off a little piece and paste it onto your webpage. I remember one time searching something about Mars because I was doing weather work with the planets, and going on a website going, wow, this is very familiar. This is very familiar. Well, it was my whole website. Somebody just took and then pasted and put their name on it and tarted it up with some nice graphics, but it was all my stuff. That is the web. So the web is creating a generation that is extremely vulnerable to uncertainty, hyper uncertainty. And we have to do everything we can to take away from them uncertainty by giving them clear picture, good food, clear pictures about what is good and what is not good, really clear pictures about curfew. What time is it okay to come in? What time is it not okay to come in? Those types of things. And teenagers will kick and moan about that when they're teenagers, but that they'll come back to you later and go, thank you for doing that, because my friends were just allowed to do whatever they wanted, and now the wheels have come off the bus for them. So these young people who are looking for certainty from devices are sure to be disappointed. And we have to do as much as we can to provide regular rhythms, regular times for doing things, regular times. And then when they get caught up in uncertainty, just give them the fact that the quickest way to learn something is by making mistakes. That there is no other way. So if I kick myself for every mistake I ever made, I would be a very different person. But when I made a mistake, I had in my soul a deep feeling like, I better go check this out myself before I form an opinion about it, because I'm not quite so sure. We used back in the day when I was in faculty meetings with some faculty members, we used to have what we called a BS meter. It was like this. And we would just look at each other and go like this. It means what's coming down now is just, we were the agent for the oracle. We had to clear the deck because we knew that what was being said could not be taken to a place of certainty within oneself. It doesn't mean that my certainty is going to rule for everybody else, but you know what? If I work to make myself certain, I become a better member of a community. I can learn how to withhold my judgment when somebody else is giving a different opinion.
Well, that's probably a sign for us. We're at time
Yeah.
now. Thank you so much, Dad. And as always, thank you so much for participating. And we love offering this to you.
Yeah, thank you. Blessings on you all. Thank you. Bye.